Amy had always been drawn to old buildings with a sense of history, so when she saw the ad for the charming, Victorian-style apartment in the heart of the city, she knew she had to see it. The building was old, but the apartment itself had been renovated and updated with all the modern conveniences, and the rent was surprisingly affordable. As Amy moved in, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was going to be a new start for her, a fresh beginning in a beautiful new home. She spent the day unpacking and organizing her things, feeling grateful for the opportunity to start over. But as the sun began to set and the shadows started to lengthen, Amy started to feel a sense of unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She heard strange noises coming from the walls, and the floorboards seemed to creak and moan as if in protest. Trying to shake off the feeling of dread, Amy went to bed early, hoping that a good night's sleep would help her feel better in the morning. But as she lay in bed, the noises seemed to get louder and more persistent. She tossed and turned, unable to get comfortable, and eventually fell into a fitful sleep. When she woke up the next morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The apartment seemed colder and darker than it had the day before, and as she went about her day, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She tried to tell herself that it was just her imagination, but deep down she knew that something wasn't right. As the days passed, Amy's sense of unease only grew. She started to see strange shapes in the corners of her vision, and the noises at night seemed to be getting louder and more persistent. She tried to ignore it, telling herself that it was just her imagination, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One day, as she was coming home from work, she ran into her neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Johnson. He was a kind, friendly man, always ready with a smile and a wave. But as Amy spoke to him, she could sense that he was holding something back. "Is everything all right?" Amy asked, concerned. "You seem a little off." Mr. Johnson hesitated before finally speaking. "I don't mean to worry you, dear," he said, "but I think you should know the history of this building. It was built on an old cemetery, you see, and there have been reports of strange activity here in the past. Some say the spirits of the dead are still lingering here, trapped in the walls and the floorboards. There have even been reports of people disappearing without a trace, never to be seen again." Amy's blood ran cold as Mr. Johnson spoke. Could it be that the strange occurrences she had been experiencing were the work of ghosts? She tried to brush off the idea as ridiculous, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Mr. Johnson's words. As she went to bed that night, Amy couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. She had a feeling that things were only going to get worse from here. As the days went by, Amy's sense of unease only grew. She started to have vivid nightmares about a ghostly figure who seemed to be stalking her through the dark corridors of her apartment. She woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing, convinced that the ghost was real. She tried to tell herself that it was just her imagination, that it was all in her head. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She started to see the ghostly figure in her waking life as well, lurking in the shadows and watching her every move. Amy became increasingly paranoid and isolated, convinced that the ghost was targeting her specifically. She stopped leaving her apartment, too afraid to face the outside world. She knew she needed help, but she was afraid of being labeled as crazy or unstable. As the days went by, Amy's mental health deteriorated. She became convinced that the ghost was going to get her, and she lived in constant fear of what might happen next. She knew she needed to find a way to get rid of the ghost, but she had no idea where to turn. Desperate to find a way to get rid of the ghost, Amy turned to the local priest for help. She poured out her story, hoping that he would believe her and have some advice on how to get rid of the malevolent presence that was haunting her. But to her disappointment, the priest dismissed her claims and told her that she was just experiencing stress. He suggested that she seek counseling and try to find ways to cope with her anxiety. Amy left the church feeling defeated and alone. She had no one to turn to and no way to get rid of the ghost. She began to doubt her own sanity, wondering if she was just going crazy and imagining things. As the days went by, Amy's mental health deteriorated. She became paranoid and isolated, convinced that the ghost was targeting her specifically. She stopped leaving her apartment and cut herself off from the outside world. She was too afraid to face the ghost and too ashamed to admit to anyone what was happening to her. She felt trapped in her own mind, unable to escape the malevolent presence that seemed to be controlling her every move. One night, as she was lying in bed, the ghost appeared to her in a dream. It was a terrifying figure, with glowing eyes and a twisted, demonic face. It reached out towards her with icy cold fingers, and Amy woke up screaming. She knew she couldn't take it anymore. She had to find a way to get rid of the ghost, no matter what it took. She just hoped it wasn't already too late. Determined to find a way to get rid of the ghost, Amy began to research ways to banish spirits from homes. She scoured the internet, poring over countless articles and forums, looking for any information that might help her. Finally, after days of searching, she found something that seemed promising. It was a ritual that claimed to be able to banish any spirit from the home, no matter how powerful. It involved creating a circle of salt around the perimeter of the room and reciting a specific incantation. Amy knew it was a long shot, but she was desperate. She gathered all the materials she needed and set to work. As she recited the incantation, she could feel the air around her grow colder and more charged with energy. To her surprise, the ghost began to materialize in the center of the room. It was a terrifying figure, with glowing eyes and a twisted, demonic face. It reached out towards her with icy cold fingers, and Amy knew she had to act fast. With all her might, she finished the incantation and watched as the ghost dissipated into thin air. She collapsed to the ground, exhausted but triumphant. She had done it. She had finally gotten rid of the ghost. But as she looked around the room, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There, on the floor, was a pile of bones. They were human bones, and they seemed to be fresh. Amy knew in that moment that she had been right all along. The ghost had been real, and it had been responsible for the disappearances of her neighbors. And now, it seemed, it had been targeting her as well. She just hoped it was too late for her. Desperate for help, Amy turned to a group of paranormal investigators for assistance. They were a seasoned team, with years of experience in dealing with hauntings and other supernatural occurrences. As they set to work, Amy felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they would be able to find a way to get rid of the ghost once and for all. But as the days went by, the investigators were unable to find any concrete evidence of the ghost's existence. They were sympathetic to Amy's plight, but they couldn't deny the lack of concrete evidence. Amy became more and more convinced that the ghost was targeting her specifically. She was the only one who could see it, and she was the only one who seemed to be suffering in its hands. She became isolated and paranoid, convinced that no one else could understand what she was going through. As the days went by, Amy's mental health continued to deteriorate. She was trapped in a never-ending cycle of fear and isolation, unable to escape the malevolent presence that seemed to be controlling her every move. She just hoped it was all a nightmare and that she would wake up soon. But deep down, she knew it was all too real. As the days went by, Amy's mental and physical health continued to deteriorate. She was barely eating or sleeping, and she was constantly on edge. She knew she had to do something to get rid of the ghost, or it would be the end of her. One night, as she lay in bed, the ghost appeared to her in a dream. It was a terrifying figure, with glowing eyes and a twisted, demonic face. It reached out towards her with icy cold fingers, and Amy knew she had to act fast. She woke up with a start, her heart racing. She knew what she had to do. She gathered all the materials she needed and set to work preparing for the final showdown. As she recited the incantation, she could feel the air around her grow colder and more charged with energy. The ghost began to materialize in the center of the room, and Amy knew she had to act fast. With all her might, she finished the incantation and watched as the ghost dissipated into thin air. She collapsed to the ground, exhausted but triumphant. She had done it. She had finally got rid of the ghost. As the days went by, Amy's health began to improve. She was able to sleep peacefully, and the strange noises and visions stopped. She knew that the ghost was gone for good, and she was finally able to start rebuilding her life. She just hoped that the nightmare was truly over. As the days went by, Amy's health continued to improve. She was finally able to sleep peacefully, and the strange noises and visions stopped. She knew that the ghost was gone for good, and she was able to start rebuilding her life. But despite her newfound peace, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was a sense of unease that lingered in the back of her mind. One day, as she was walking home from work, she noticed something strange on the ground. It was a piece of paper crumpled and stained with dirt. As she picked it up, she saw that it was a page from an old book. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The page was covered in strange symbols and incantations, and it seemed to be written in some kind of ancient language. As she read it, a cold chill ran down her spine. It was a page from the very ritual that she had used to banish the ghost, but the ritual had been incomplete. There was a final incantation that she had never performed, and the ghost had been waiting for her to finish it. Amy realized with a sinking feeling that she had never truly gotten rid of the ghost. It had been waiting for her all along, biding its time until she finished the ritual. And now it was too late. The ghost was free to roam once more, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Amy knew that she had made a terrible mistake. She should have never tried to banish the ghost. Now it was too late. The nightmare was far from over.